Welcome, everybody. My name's Christina Woolner, and I was really excited to be asked to chair this session today. For those of you who don't know me, I work with KIDE, but my other day job, I'm an anthropologist. And the abiding question that has kind of shaped my research for the last decade or so is what happens to stories in the wake of violence and forced migration? And then what and how do the stories that we tell help kind of make space for people to make sense of their own experiences and to kind of open the conversation about how we might move forward into something new. And so I was really excited to be able to read this book because I think it's a fascinating example of how telling a story in a particular way can open out into so many different themes, and hopefully with you today open out into an interesting conversation. I've been lucky enough to read a kind of advanced copy of this book, but I know that none of you will be familiar with the story. So Salma, just to start, could you tell us about the story that you tell in this book?
I hope this works. Yes, so Salutation Road is the story of 23-year-old Siraj Ali, who finds herself transported to a parallel universe in modern-day Somalia, Mogadishu, and there she sees what her life would be like if her parents hadn't left Mogadishu during the war in the 90s, and at that time she was 5 years old. So it's a book about what happens to her and her relationships and her life after that journey. She can only stay there for one day. So, yeah, and it's set in Greenwich, where I grew up.
All right, yes, so building off that last point, the title of the book is taken from the name of a street in Greenwich, which, as you said, is where you grew up. Can you tell us a bit about why you gave it this title and the significance of place to the story?
Yeah, so the title is Salutation Road. It used to have a different title, Frankincense. If any of you follow me on social media, you might have heard, you might have seen me talk about frankincense. But Salutation Road, interestingly enough, is a place where nothing happens. Like, there's nothing there. It's just a little bit of I think a cul-de-sac just kind of tucked away somewhere in north of Greenwich, just covered in different tiny abandoned warehouses, or maybe some of them are still in business, I don't know. But the place, I think, formed like a really good backdrop for my story because nothing happens there. And in the story, it's used as almost like this junction between the parallel universes, between the current dimension and the one that Siraj travels to, and people are crossing over back and forth in different ways. Yeah, so I thought it's in a little mysterious corner of Greenwich, so it'd be nice to write about that.
All right. Can you, just a little follow-up, can you tell me why did you decide to change it from frankincense? Because I know frankincense also plays a significant role in the story.
Yeah. I think I wanted to draw attention more to place because I feel like that was a strong theme in the book. Frankincense was one of the symbols in the book. It was kind of like a motif, and that was meant to symbolize memory and the effect of something so small as smelling like a perfume or a scent can take you back. But choosing Salutation Road was all about the idea of time and place, and it being set in Greenwich. I mean, Greenwich GMT, like, it wasn't lost on me that I could kind of play with the idea of time travel, you know, growing up in Greenwich myself and thinking about that a lot. And also a character that gets to travel to a parallel universe, so yeah.
Just, can you advance the slide? Just wait there, so now you can see what the book looks like there. So you mentioned you grew up in Greenwich. The protagonist of the book is a young woman. Can you tell me how much of the story is inspired by your own experience? How much is autobiographical? How much is just completely imagined?
It's a mix of all three things, and yes, a lot of it is quite autobiographical, but maybe not in the most obvious ways. And I think I kind of want to keep a lot of that to myself, which bits are personal and which bits are just imagination. But a lot of it is just based on, I guess, the Somali diaspora story in the UK, and a mixture of conversations and stories and fragments of rumour or things that I've kind of heard growing up from like family and friends, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of bring that all together in a book and partially try to understand it, but I guess the more I wrote about it, the less I understood.
I think that often tends to happen. You write and you realize how much you still don't understand, and then you have to keep writing. Yeah. Just to back up a little bit, so Ayan mentioned you were a volunteer here 5 or 6 years ago, and now you're back here on the stage as an author, as a first-time author. Can you tell us a bit about what's happened in that time, and what brought you to kind of writing this book?
Yeah, so I think I volunteered in 2018 or 19, I'm not even sure. But at the time, I had already written a couple of drafts of this novel. But I was drawn to the idea of writing a book that could be a means of starting discussions within my community, but also beyond. That was both universal and also quite personal and local in a sense. And I kind of wanted to just be in the mix of it all, so I thought Somali Week was a great place to go meet other writers and artists and be inspired, and I'm always inspired when I come here, like talking to filmmakers and you know, business owners and things. So yeah, it really is like a full circle moment for me to like it's not really start here, but like this was sort of part of the early journey, and then come back here. And I was just discussing with Ayan earlier, like, you know, the idea of like presenting a person to my community is like quite a nice special way to start. So it was important to do that for me. And
why writing? Like there are a lot of different ways to tell stories. Fiction, a novel, is one particular way. Why have you chosen? Why has this become the form that you wanted to use?
I like the idea. At the time when I was writing my book, I just started the earliest draft in my third year of university, and at the time I was reading other books that I found very inspiring. So, for example, Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, like a lot of coming of age books. And I thought that there wasn't anything out there at the time that looked at like the Somali coming of age, especially like the urban Somali coming of age. And I liked how writers, even from those of like centuries gone, we could still read their works and engage with it in a way. And the medium of the book allows someone to write something that people from like decades to come can still respond to and still, you know, be affected by. So I like that novels could do that.
Okay, great. So you mentioned you had, even 5 years ago, a draft of this. So going from kind of an idea and a draft of a book to kind of bringing it to fruition and finding a press is a long journey, especially for a first-time author. I'm wondering if you could you share a little bit about that process, especially maybe keeping in mind that there are people in the audience who might have stories in their heads also.
Yeah, it's a long journey. I will start by saying that. But when I was starting the writing journey, I had no concept of how long it would take or even what it would take. When I was writing, I had very little experience. I didn't know anyone that was a published author. I hadn't done the thing that a lot of authors do, where they'll do a lot of reading around the book, they'll join loads of classes, and then they'll write something. I did it a little bit in a very unorthodox way, where I started out with a draft of a book, and all I really had was a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I was like, okay, that's like a good start, and maybe I can learn along the way. So, I could write a whole book just about my writing journey and just how challenging it has been. But I think that's also the most like poignant part of it. It's that setting out to do something like writing a book or any other form of art actually requires so much like inner work and growth, because you face a lot of rejection along the way, and you meet so many people that kind of help shape your story in different aspects.
Yeah.
And the publishing industry is incredibly competitive, and it's really difficult. And there are so many people that write incredible books, and just by sheer chance, some of them will never see an agent or a writer because there's just so much out there already that such a small group of publishers have to sift through to find. So a lot of it is just, I guess, backing yourself and believing in your story, but also being willing to kind of just ride out every storm that comes your way, and every no and every maybe, you know.
Did you just? I'm just out of curiosity. I want to know a little bit more about the specifics. Did you find how did you find an agent? Did you find an agent first? How did you find an agent? How did you find a press?
I went on a long journey with I kind of just made like a long list of agents in London, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to approach them like a group at a time, and they can take a long time to respond. Sometimes you'll wait for like 3 months or 4 months or longer and only to not get a response, or like, you know, it's not really what we're looking for. But I remember it was around like mid-pandemic, and I just received another rejection from a literary agency, and it was a strange one because they liked the original extract. Usually you send out like the first 3 chapters of your book. They liked that, and then they got back to me and said, can we like get the full book? So I sent the full manuscript over, obviously really excited, thinking that, you know, they must like what I'm writing for them to want to read the full thing. And they did like it, but they wanted me to change a lot of the book that was really important to me. And I had very similar experiences where people would be like, we really like your writing, but I'm not really sure about this element of the story. Could you take this out and write it in this way? So that was a big challenge for a good few years, and I just kind of stuck by the story, and it got a little bit disheartening because I just reached a point where I was like, maybe it isn't going to be this story that I publish, maybe it's going to be another one. So I started another book, and then I remember on one like just random day in September, I was like, this is September 2020, I think. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to submit my first 3 chapters to this competition. It's the Future Worlds Prize, and it's a prize for science fiction and fantasy. And my book, it's not like a clear-cut genre. It kind of is a crossover a little bit into like literary and what people call science fiction or speculative. So I just submitted it thinking this probably isn't what they're looking for, but that's just going to be my target of the week, I guess. Just like send it out. And then I ended up getting shortlisted. And then I went to the awards night, and that's where I met my agent, because he had read the book and he really loved it. And he was just like, I need to like have a call with you tomorrow morning. And then he read the entire book, like finished the rest of it, because he only read the extract. Got on a meeting with me, and by the end of the week, like he'd signed me to, So there's moments, I would say, with publishing where nothing happens. There's long periods where nothing happens at all. And I think this is like the same thing with any art form. You're just kind of alone, just kind of working away at it. And then all of a sudden, it's in front of an audience, and then everything happens really quickly. So, yeah.
I understand that you founded an organization called Literary Natives, which helps authors of color find their audience. Which I wonder, now your comment about so much of art is being alone, and it seems like an organization like this is very much about sharing experiences and not being alone. Could you say a little bit about what that organization did and how your experiences have shaped that?
Yeah, so some people who probably in the writing world, especially in the London writing world where it's quite small and people are very connected, might remember Literary Natives, because at the time it was just all the writing spaces were very, very white, sometimes a lot older, and I wanted to like put together a space for writers who were, what I would call now the global majority, just other stories that aren't normal, the mainstream. And we ran from about, I think, 2018 to just the end of 2019, just doing like events, really, just bringing people together, allowing writers to meet other writers, to meet publishers, to meet agents, and it was great. And then obviously the pandemic happened, and the physical spaces kind of, disintegrated. And at that time, I was like, I need to put a lot of effort into my own story, and I'd like to get to the end of this journey and hopefully have something to share with other writers, have something to impart, so it's a bit more concrete.
Okay. Do you have any other advice for aspiring authors?
My biggest advice definitely is like read really widely in your genre, see how other people do it, and like for example, I have a pile of books next to me every time I write because I'm working on my second novel, and I always reread them for different things. So there's one book where I really love the way they portray characters, and they're very real characters, and they very memorable. So I like to read that. And then there's books where I just love the language and just how clean sentences are. So you'll never be too well read, so just keep reading within your genre and explore new ones, because sometimes you think you're writing about one thing, but it's actually about something else. I would say do kind of what I did and just find very different ways to kind of access publishing. Maybe it's not going to be through the traditional email. Maybe you have to go to an event, or you have to speak to a friend who's in the industry and ask them if they can introduce you to someone that they know. Do things differently to stand out. Connect with people on your level as well, those who are writing, just make friends, and just keep trying to be better.
All right, that's great. I think we'll probably have a bit of time at the end if people want to ask more specific questions. I'd like to shift a little bit now and ask you some more specific questions about the story and about some of the themes and passages that really resonated as I was reading it. So Salutation Road begins as a story of kind of what ifs or hypotheticals, which you've already told us a little bit about. So specifically, what it would be like to get a glimpse of a life, what life would be like if Surad's family had stayed in Mogadishu rather than coming to the UK. And then this becomes reality for her. And on this journey, she meets essentially herself, or her double, who is named Uba, as well as other members of her family. And I'm just wondering, where did the idea for this kind of premise come from? You've mentioned it's not quite sci-fi, it's maybe speculative. Yeah, why did you decide to set the book up in this way?
You know what? That's such a good question, because I can't really pinpoint exactly what inspired this plot. Probably somewhere in between my fascination with time, and I guess there's this universal question where it's like, what if that particular event didn't happen that had really impacted your life? That could be moving from one place to another, meeting a certain person. I think we all sort of have this question within us in different ways. So that was kind of the starting point. And I just had this idea of I guess I was watching a lot of films, of surrealist films, and I like the idea of exploring a surrealist version of Somalia that's not a factual one. Because if I was to write a book about Somalia and a very realist kind of book, I would definitely have a lot of relatives asking me, well, why didn't you include this, and that didn't happen that way, and that kind of thing. So maybe that was my way of escaping that. I kind of want to make a very as make-believe as possible, so that I can still explore the same themes, but not be so tied down to real historical events.
Okay. So the main character, Surad, is understandably secretive about her experiences, and she's really hesitant to talk about them. But she does end up opening up with some elderly visitors to a community kitchen where I think she's volunteering. And I want to read a passage from this encounter. So sometimes when they're really comfortable, I'll say it's narrated in the first person. Sometimes when they're really comfortable, they tell me their secrets. I tell them my secrets too, loudly and animatedly over plates of Sunday roast. And they drink it all in with delight. So what does she want? Uba, this is Surad's double. What will she do? They speak about Uba like she's a character in a story I'm writing. I look at their earnest expressions and half-open mouths. I don't know, to live fully maybe, to feel at home? Isn't that what we all want? I suppose so, but the question is, how is someone not at home in the only place they've ever known? I'm stunned by this question. It comes from Bertie, a 78-year-old retired crochet artist. I'm so inspired by it that I write it down in my phone. And I think this question also stunned me in the same way that it stunned the protagonist in the story, in a sense. And I jotted down the page number so that I could return to it, because it seems to capture a tension at the heart of the book, one that applies both to Uba and to Sirad and to several other characters. And I'm just wondering if you could reflect a bit on that question.
So Sirad and her double, so Uba is like another version of Sirad in the parallel world, and I've given them a different name because Uba is kind of Sirad's other name. A lot of Somalis can relate to having like two names. So when Sirad goes to Somalia in the double world, in the parallel world, she meets Uba and she finds that she's living a completely different life. Uba in Somalia, she's married, she's all, of course, she's the same age, but she's going through completely different things. She's unsure whether she wants to stay where she is. And she's also at a crossroads, kind of like Sirad. But when Sirad goes to the parallel world, she expects that that's somewhere that she will feel at home. Like that's kind of a missing piece to her story to understand this backstory. And I don't want to say too much, but Uba also comes to London and comes to Sirad's side of time. And they talk a lot, and there are some things that they relate on, but there are a lot of differences between them as well. So this question that is asked by that member of the community, I think it really hits Sirad hard because it just points out that sometimes you have this expectation of a place and what it's supposed to stand for. And then when you go there and you experience it, you find out that it's actually not what you imagined it would be at all. And the idea of not feeling at home in the only place that you've ever known as a home, I think is something that a lot of people can relate to for various reasons, maybe because of immigration, maybe because of just certain experiences. And I guess maybe a lot of us just have this sense of, we kind of hope that there's another place that we will feel more at home, that will make more sense. And yeah, that's a lot of the ruminations that she has at that part of the book.
Yeah. I think that passage is fairly early on, but I think it's a theme that recurs and is kind of addressed in various ways, quite thoughtfully and provocatively. So I hope you all want to read the book and see that also. So I was struck by how much this story revealed about intergenerational dynamics and how the experiences of forced migration can impact relationships between parents and children, and also extended family members, and also how different generations experience migration differently. And one way that this theme comes up is that we don't just meet Sirad's double, Uba, we also meet Mama, who is the name that you give for Hoy. In the normal world, she calls her mother Hoyo. In the other world, she calls her Mama. As well as Abo, he's only known by Abo. You can reflect on that or leave that up to readers to find out why you've done that. And also the existence of Ahmed, Sirad's younger brother, becomes conditional. And so all of these mirrors reflect back something different. So the kind of comparison between Sirad and Uba tells us one thing, but between Mama and Hoyo also tells us something different, and how she kind of envisions Abo and then meets Abo also says something. And I'm wondering if you can you say something about this story about generation that you wanted to tell in the book?
So throughout the book, there's almost like a side story that has been told about, I guess, a changing landscape, both the one in London and the one in Somalia, and also family. So in Greenwich, at the beginning of the book, Greenwich looks one way. The view that she has outside her bedroom window and down from the balcony, it's something that's really etched into her mind, and is a big part of who she is, because she comes home from work, she likes to sit on her balcony and just kind of decompress. But then this book is told over two sort of self-contained timelines. The first one is when she goes to the parallel world and sort of what happens after. And then there's 6 years later, we meet Sirad again, and this time she's married. She's like moved on in so many aspects. She's reached where she wants to in her career, and she's, for all intents and purposes, really tried to distance herself from that old existence in Greenwich and everything that happened with the parallel world and Ubrah, because she makes, without spoiling it, she makes a big mistake and does something that she doesn't really expect herself to do. So the story of Generation looks at both the changing landscape of Greenwich and how, for example, the loss of the library, that's like such an important setting in the book. That library was where she learned to read, where she made friends with Maxine, the librarian. And then we lose the library, as is, you know, people can probably relate to in their local area. Maybe your local library is no more. So the way that, I guess, maybe we can call it gentrification, or like, you know, a kind of late stage urbanization where some of the third spaces that we know are being lost, that tells a story of generations, because the next generation probably won't know what we knew, like being able to go to a library which had everything like community events and being able to access that. And then her family changes as well, because her mum ends up moving from London to Somalia in the real world. And she's kind of like done with her life in London. She starts a new chapter there. And there is a scene where the mum tells her, you know, she's encouraging her to maybe think about having a baby and, you know, passing things down. But Sirad kind of stops herself, and she's in this kind of limbo about thinking about being a mother, because she's not sure what she can pass down. And most importantly, she made a huge mistake in her early 20s that she hasn't really moved on from, and she's still keeping secrets. So it examines what it means to kind of pass things down. Do we pass down only lessons, or do we pass down our experiences, or our true selves, or what we hope to be our best selves? And also generation and how we interact with the world around us. And
Okay, so that leads on to the next question I had in the passage that I wanted to read. So near the end of the book, this is when Sirad is older, she recounts a kind of persistent conversation that she's having with her mother, who thinks she should be having children by now. And it's a conversation about children, but also aging and the kind of legacies that we leave. So I want to read a section from there. And it starts with Hoyo speaking. "I only have 2 children, she often says. One of them is too busy running around the world to find himself a wife, and the other one wants to remain a little girl for as long as possible. What will I do when I become old, and the only thing I can do is talk and talk? Who will I tell stories to?" I try to brush off her comments. "None of you raised in this generation will be able to tell those stories unless you learn them from your elders. And even then, it won't sound the same. Stories die if they're not passed on. I know that I can't have a child just to keep my mother happy. There has to be a deeper, more intentional reason. Nevertheless, I like the idea of passing down stories in a world full of harmful narratives. There is something so powerful about that." Can you reflect a bit on this passage and more generally what it means to pass on stories and what kind of story you hope to pass on in this book?
So there is a small detail in the book. I mean, it's not significant, but this is actually set in the summer of 2016 of the Brexit referendum. And I don't know if you guys remember that time, but there was a lot in the media about immigration and migration and, you know, how our world will change. There was also the US election. So it's a backdrop in the book. Sirad doesn't spend too much time thinking about it. She kind of just lives. But she is thinking about, especially in the latter half of the book, when she's married and she thinks she's kind of settled down in life a bit, she's thinking about her own story, because she's keeping a secret at this point. She hasn't been honest about what has happened in the parallel world with her husband. They haven't really had a discussion about it. And so her fear there is, if I am to have a child and, you know, pass on these stories, which she believes is important, would I be telling the truth? Can I be honest with my child or others around me? Can I even be honest with myself? She hasn't reached that yet. So she's doing a lot of thinking about that. And as you will find out if you read it, the secret kind of finds its way out anyway. Yeah.
Without giving anything away, I'll say that the ending leaves Sirad's future kind of undetermined and allows the reader to imagine, in a way, different possibilities for her. Can you tell me why you chose to end the book in this way, and what message are you hoping readers will take away from this?
Yeah, I won't say exactly what happens at the end, but it is quite open-ended. There's a lot there that you can work with to try and, I guess, figure out maybe what decisions Sirad ends up making. But I wanted to leave it open-ended because I feel like stories are always unfinished, and it wouldn't be honest if I was to end the book with a really clear-cut ending in the sense of Sirad finally finding the missing piece that's missing to her life, or her coming to terms with things, because often that's not what happens. Even in our daily lives, we may have experiences where maybe we've thought about it in different ways, but it's never really a finished story. So I wanted us to sort of end the book with the sense that Sirad is still living, and she's still making decisions, and she's still living with the consequences of her actions. And that's kind of what I wanted to leave the reader with, like something for them to keep reflecting on.
Okay. I'm going to open the floor to questions in just a minute, but before that, I just wanted to give you a chance to. Is there anything else that you would like to add about kind of how you came to this book and what you hope that it will do?
You know what? I received a box of my proof copies a couple of days ago. I had to get them from a separate postage room, so I didn't really notice them there at home. And I was like, oh, it's a box of books, and it feels real seeing them, especially in like multiple of them. But the one thing I do want to say is, throughout this entire process of like writing and publishing and talking about my book, I never really knew much about what was going to happen next. Like, it wasn't something that I had like thoroughly researched, at least not to the point of understanding it. So I just want to say that if there's anything out there, if there's anything that you feel passionately about, that you're working on, you don't always have to have all the answers up front, and you don't have to have figured it out when you do it. I think it's enough to just start, even with just 10% of the information. Then you just learn, throughout the process anyway. So that makes it fun. Because today I was at an event at lunchtime at the publishing house, Pat McMillan, and every day there's just something new, and every day I'm getting an email about words that I don't understand, and I'm just like, what does that mean? So yeah, it makes it fun when you just just kind of dive in. So yeah, I would say just go for whatever you're working on and just put it out there, and you'll learn about it in the process.
Can we all say thank you? Yeah, I'll just say from me, thank you. I really enjoyed reading this book, and I think it's a very important story to kind of have out in the world, and I'm excited to see what happens. If you've not figured it out yet, this QR code takes you to the publisher's website, where you can pre-order a copy of the book, which, as Ayan said, comes out in February. All right, well, thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Salma, and order your books.